Okay, we're rolling.
Hey, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. It's Dave with you. I hope you're doing well. Episode 520 of the How to Podcast series. I'm Dave Campbell. I live in Ontario, Canada. I host 9 podcasts, and I love talking to you. So thanks for being here. I appreciate you being part of the show. What do we do here? Well, this is a podcast about podcasting. And there's a lot of podcasts about podcasting, but what we do here is we do it differently because we do it for you instead of doing it for ourselves. And I would love for you to follow the show and tell somebody about the show. That would be very helpful. I want to talk about this trend. It's common in podcasting when new podcasters get stars in their eyes. And I'm speaking of not stars up in the sky, but stars that walk the red carpet and famous people. They start a podcast and they become the litmus test of what it takes to start a podcast. I want a podcast like fill in the blank. And what's hard to replicate is fame. Because you and I, we're not famous. No. And the people we're comparing ourselves to are. And they have an advantage because they are them and they're not us. When I meet with new podcasters and we talk about the idea for a show, what I hear is, I want a show like Mel Robbins, or I want a show like Theo Vaughn, or like Joe Rogan, or Call Me Daddy, or whatever. They have this, and I want the production value. I want it to sound like, I want the video to look like so-and-so. Diary of a CEO is a great example. I want to be like that. How much does that cost? How fast can I get to that level? And I'm like, this does not make sense. This is not how it works. They're starting at a different starting line than you are. And it's going to take you time to catch up to anywhere close to where they are. And I think it actually does more harm than good when we frequently compare our podcast to one of a podcast of an expert, in that they are an expert in being famous. And they're really good at it. And they've built a career around their name and who they are. And people are drawn to them because of that element. It's not really that they're drawn to the podcast. They're drawn to the person. And unless you're famous already, you don't have the same starting point. And I don't think it's fair for you to anticipate the same success that a podcaster who starts with fame. I don't think it's an even comparison, and I don't think it's fair to you. So I'm asking you to stop being unfair to yourself and to your audience and focus on the things you can do in your show. So I'm going to talk about a few things that are unfair comparisons that frustrate new podcasters like you, like me. And if we focus on these things, we're never going to succeed in our podcast. So I'm glad you're here. Might be a little bit hard to hear today, but I think it'll help if you refocus your attention on what really matters. And it's not the famous superstars that matter. No, it's you and it's your audience. That's what matters. So I'm glad you're here. All right, let's talk about this. So one of the first things I get when I talk to a podcaster that wants to do an interview podcast is they want to do an interview podcast like fill in the blank. I want to get big name guests on my show, and by doing that, I will become famous. I will leverage other people's fame to build my own because I'm unknown in the industry, and by getting in front of big names and having big names on my show's got to grow. So I'm going to start with the big names. First of all, big names are looking to be on big name podcasts. They're very seldom looking to be on a show with 5, 10, 20 listens. They're looking to be on shows with 100,000 listeners. So the likelihood of you out of the gate with no fame, no name behind you, reaching out to some big Hollywood person or musician or whatever is pretty low that they're going to respond to you. So the idea that, well, this big famous podcaster has all Hollywood stars on yeah, it's because they have a relationship with the guests they have on. Listen to Smartless or Fly on the Wall with Dana Carvey and David Spade. These people are interviewing people they know. Theo Von, he's bringing on people that he knows from the comedy world and the music world. And he's bringing on people because he's Theo Von. You're not Theo Von. Theo Von is not listening to this podcast. I wish you would. I'd love to have Theo Von on this podcast. If you know Theo Von, oh gosh. Yeah, Theo, come on the show. I would love to talk to this guy because I admire him and how he shows up. Anyways, side tangent aside, I think as podcasters, we need to stop trying to be like the big shows and try to be the best show that we can be. That's what people are looking for. They're not looking for a copy of someone else's show. They're looking for your show. They want to connect with you. That's who they're looking for. I don't think you're going to get a lot of interaction from a big name show. Joe Rogan has never emailed me. Never. Mel Robbins has never left me a voice message on my SpeakPipe. Really interesting. Yeah, it's never happened. So they're big. They don't have time to reach out to their listeners and to celebrate and to connect and put free calendar links on their website for you to come and meet with them for a virtual coffee. That's not happening. There's no way that they can do that en masse for that size of an audience. It's not happening. But when you have 5 listeners listening to your episode, it's possible for you to meet these people and to have a connection with them that goes beyond recording and posting your podcast onto the internet. You can actually have a conversation with people. New podcasters often chase the celebrity-led blueprint for how to make a podcast, which can really create some false expectations and overemphasize things like big name guests. I don't think a big name guest is going to solve your podcast growth problems. A new show trying to find big name guests is not going to make you famous. It's not. Having a good name on your show is great if you can do it. On Living the Next Chapter, it took tons of episodes before I started getting people with a name that people would recognize. Yeah, it's just not how it works. It takes time. So if you're thinking, I'm just going to create a show from nothing, I have no name behind myself, I have no social following, I've never done anything that makes me famous, or my name is not known, a household name, then you're starting where everyone else starts, at 0. And it's not fair to you to compare yourself to a big podcast and thinking that a big name guest is going to do the same for you that it does for them. It doesn't work that way. And the likelihood of a big name guest seeking you out with your 10, 15, 20 listeners per episode, they're not looking for you. They're looking to get in front of the biggest set of listeners possible. And for us new podcasters, that's not us. So stop comparing yourself to big name podcasts and how they get big name guests. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to your audience. Another thing that really gets frustrating when I talk to podcasters when they're starting a show is I ask them, like, you got time to put into this, right? And they say yes. Okay, that's good. You've created some time in your calendar. For me, I basically stopped watching television because it's just does nothing for me. my mind's like wanders off as the shows. I don't even remember what we're watching. And I've got like so many half-watched episodes on Prime and Netflix and stuff. I don't even know where I left off. I'd much rather spend time with you and podcast than sit and watch TV now at this point in my life. But as I think about this, I think about how podcasters that we admire, these big name shows. Well, when I talk to new podcasters, I'm like, you got time, but do you have money? And they're like, oh, no. No. I need to do this for free. Now, I do have a website, podcastforfree.com, podcastforfree.com. And on podcastforfree.com, I have a list of things that I use that are free tools for podcasters. So yeah, you could start for free, but free isn't a great foundation to build a money-generating podcast. Why would we need to generate money with our podcast? Well, if you want to make this your living, you want to leave your job and podcast, then you're going to need life-changing money, not pennies, but dollars upon dollars upon dollars to supplement your income that you get from a regular job. So you're starting with zero. When you compare yourself to big shows, they have inflated budgets, and people who get paid to do every part of the podcast creation and research and recording and editing and promo, and they've got teams upon teams upon teams. They have teams who help other teams to help other teams to help you. It's an unfair comparison when you're sitting in your home in your pajama pants using free software to create your podcast and then wondering why you're not podcast famous yet. Well, they did it. Yeah. They didn't do it alone. For the most part, I don't think there's very many people who have started a podcast and immediately was turning in an income. Bam. There's probably some anomalies, and people love to celebrate the anomalies, but 80+%, let's say, that's not how things work. So when you compare your podcast to an overinflated podcast with a budget that would make you dizzy, I don't think that's a fair comparison for you and your audience. So please stop comparing your budget to their budget and trying to emulate what they do on a shoestring. It costs money to do what they do, and there's no way to get around that. So if you want a fancy podcast with a nice, beautiful studio and multiple cameras and all of these things, you're going to pay some money. I had somebody reach out to me, and I'm trying to help them with their show. And they came back and said, yeah, let's do the audio podcast, but I want to do like a cartoon video for YouTube. So it's going to be all animated. It's going to be around my topic. I don't want to be on camera, but can we do a video, basically of like a movie for their episodes so it could be on YouTube without being just a picture, no moving video. And they're like, yeah, can we do this? I'm like, how much money do you have? And they're like, none. Well, how do you expect to pay for that? That's software and time. That's not one click as of recording. So how are you going to pay for it? And they're like, I don't have the money for that. Well, then maybe we need to scale back. But they're like, well, this other person does it. I'm like, yeah. They have like 100,000 followers, and they make money from ads, and the money from the ads pay for everything. You have no listeners and no money and no ads. So comparing yourself to what other people can produce is not fair to you, and it's not fair to your audience. We're misaligning our goals. We are trying to copy someone else's success without trying to copy the work to get to where they took them to get there. It takes time. We need to focus on a clear value proposition for our show. Come up with a consistent format for our podcast. We need to have content that's audience driven. We need to have smart production. And we need to be very selective with our guest strategy if we want to grow our podcast over time. The one thing I think a lot of new podcasters forget is that celebrities bring built-in audiences to their podcast. They have the money and the resources and the advertisers to do a high production podcast. Their budgets are enormous. And they're super active in cross promotion. They already have a platform to promote the podcast they've just created. Most new podcasters don't have any of these things. And trying to imitate those elements can lead to you over-investing in your guests, in your production, in your quality, in your marketing, before you've even developed the core concept of your show. You haven't developed your audience, and you don't even know what your value proposition is. You don't even know what your show is about. And you're already putting undue stress on your podcast to perform in a way that's not fair to you, and it's not fair to your audience. Some things to watch out for as you build out your show, so that you don't just go try to copy the big shows, because that's not fair. Misaligned expectations and scope drift. When you create your podcast and expect instant reach or sponsorships right out of the gate, and again, you're not famous, that's based on a celebrity success model. It often leads to chasing flashy metrics, paying for fake downloads, and trying to fake it till you make it, rather than building a unique niche, discovering what your audience needs, and developing your episode format so that you know where you're heading with your show. When your goals are misaligned, you start to drift. Another one is overemphasis on guest-driven growth. Like we said before, your podcast is going to succeed based on reliable publishing, clear messaging, and loyal listenership, more than a guest with prestige on your show. That's where you're going to grow. It's all around content, storytelling, listener value, and focusing on them. We talk also about budget and production inflation. Those big celebrity shows that you admire, do you understand that's a business? And they demand high production budgets and aggressive marketing spends. And when they don't meet their targets, that's when people get fired. That's when shows stop. And that's when hosts lose their podcast. So when you hear on the news that a big fancy podcast company with some big fancy podcaster, some famous person, and their show gets canceled, it's because it's a business and it wasn't making a return on investment. And that big fancy team has been redirected to somewhere else. We, as individual podcasters who podcast on our own with a very limited budget, if at all, we can't be fired because there's nobody here to fire us. I'm looking around. I have my cat and a cold cup of coffee. It's just me. There's no one here that can fire me from my show. So I don't have this looming budget over my head. If I don't meet a certain number, I'm done. We don't have that. And that should be a good thing. It's also the platform and algorithm expectations that come along with having a big show. Platforms often surface celebrity content more prominently than your show, than this show. Why? Because we're not famous. The platforms want to get the most people to see the smallest number of shows more often. That's it. Most of these apps are not going to celebrate the podcaster with 5 listens. You're not going to be one of the top 100 podcasts if your show doesn't have a certain number of listeners. You won't get the same promotional juice as a big show with a big budget, with a big name, and a big audience. The platforms like the bigger shows. It just seems normal. That seems right. That's why big shows continue to stay big, and little shows generally continue to stay little. The platforms give preferences to bigger shows. Yes, they'll throw a bone to us once in a while, keep us tagging along, but really, the cool kids at the cool kid table are all the big shows with the big budgets, because that's where the money is for the platform, for the host, for the business, for the advertisers. It's all about the money. Follow the money, and you will see exactly who's valued for what. The platforms like the bigger shows. New podcasts were disadvantaged by discoverability gaps, not being promoted as a new podcast, not being promoted as a must-listen podcast. We're not a top 100, so we're nothing type thing. That happens when you're starting out. So to compare yourself to the big shows, you're doing yourself a disservice and to your audience as well. There's also the amount of the content quality versus the volume. The big name shows, the celebrity model we're talking about, they can incentivize frequency and big name connections at the expense of depth, authenticity, and audience trust. They don't need to go deep. They don't need to be authentic, and they don't need your trust. They're already famous. They don't need that. By prioritizing volume over strong listener-centered episodes, this actually can burn you out for your show if you try to copy their model. You need to be the opposite of the big name show. You need depth. You need to be authentic, and you need the trust of the audience. You need exactly what the big shows don't need. So you need to invest your time in that, where they don't need it. It's nothing that they would even be focused on. We need to focus on the quality of our content versus the amount of podcast episodes that we put out into the world. There's also a risk around branding, and back to that famous word, authenticity. When we try to copy those big shows, when we're not famous, we're trying to copy a persona. And by doing that, we risk being inauthentic in how we brand our shows and how people respond to us. Listeners respond to genuine voices, a real mission, and real values. Trying to imitate fame when you're not famous and I'm not famous can actually dilute any kind of unique perspective that you have and that a new show offers. We don't need to try to be like fill in the blank. We need to be us. Here's some practical things that we can do as podcasters that are safer alternatives for new podcasters instead of comparing yourself to the big shows. First, we got to start with a clear value proposition. We talk about this often here on the How to Podcast series. We need to define who our audience is, how we help our audience, and what's our unique angle for our show that sets us apart from all of the other podcasts like us and the celebrity podcasts. We need to validate our ideas with small, real conversations before scaling into something bigger. Start with a clear value proposition. What is this show about? Who's it for? And always add on so that our audience will ... what? What is in it for them? We also need to build around consistency and format first. We need to figure out what works for us and our audience around the length of our show, how often we do our show, and having repeatable structure within our podcasts, whether it's segments and subsegments, interview, solo, co-hosted, seasonal, all of those things. We need to focus on those types of things because consistency is more than just how often you release an episode. Consistency is how the show looks, feels, sounds, everything. It involves more than just the frequency of how often you release your podcast. Consistency builds trust more reliably than any big name guest on your show. And we need to emphasize audience-led content in our podcasts by inviting listener questions into our show and feedback and community-driven topics. Growth tends to be sustainable when episodes answer real listener needs, not just attract guests. So an example, I guess, could be New Heights, the Kelsey brothers, football podcast. Broad strokes here, I understand, but most likely a male audience for 50 to 60%, maybe? I don't know. I'm not a football guy, so I have no idea. But primarily a football-based podcast and the stories they tell and the behind the scenes of football. So for them, having Taylor Swift on the show as a star guest seemed like a bit of a stretch because besides her attending a football game, I'm really not sure she knows much about football, let alone ever played football. I'm sure there's a Swiftie who can correct me on this, but I'm pretty sure she's never played in the NFL. So having her on as a guest on the podcast brought a lot of attention, but was it really for the audience? Or was it really just for the virality of it? I'm thinking it's going to go with the virality of it. And then along with that, I would say that if we're going to have guests on your show, unlike New Heights, that you have some well-chosen guests who really are aligned with your topic, not a Taylor Swift on a football podcast. I would have thought that Taylor would have been on more of a music podcast or a podcast for women. I find that would have been more of her target audience just based on the sheer makeup of her audience for her live shows. I would think she would skew more towards a female audience from an outside point of view, right? So have the right guest on your show if you're going to do guests. Because again, if you try to emulate the big shows by bringing on an unrelated guest on your show, it might not be the same result that the Kelsey brothers had with Taylor, because that's an unfair comparison. You got multiple famous people on a podcast together. A, we can't replicate that as an unfamous podcaster. And B, we're not going to see the same results. So as much as I love the fact that Taylor came to podcasting, which brought more people into the podcasting world, as a small show like you and me, we can't copy that. We can't replicate that. So if that's your goal, to have Taylor Swift on your podcast and you have 5 listens, it's going to take a little bit of work. And that, again, is unfair to you and your audience. So I don't want to dissuade you from creating a show that you love. Take inspiration from podcasts that you find and that inspire you. I love how Theo Vaughn brings in voice messages from his audience, and he truly listens on his show to his audience. He truly, like, face to camera connection with his audience. He's very open about his struggles. He's very open about his childhood and his relationship with his dad and his addiction. And he puts it out there almost awkwardly too much, but in a genuine way. And he can flip the switch and he's hilarious. But when he connects with an audience, he connects with an audience. That is something that you can bring into your show. Theo Von can have almost any guest he wants, I would believe, by this point. You can't. So pick up the things that are transferable for your show, and then admire the things that you would love to have down the road. But please stop comparing yourself or expecting the same results of somebody who has got fame in other areas where you don't. You're going to frustrate yourself and you're going to give up. You're going to give up on your show. You're going to give up on your audience. You're going to give up on your idea. And you're going to walk away from your podcast when you don't become podcast famous overnight. Podcasting is not a viral hit. Yes, there are exceptions to everything. But for you and I, it's a long, long road. And your podcast is going to grow based on what you put into it. Financially, time-wise, your talents, your ability, your practice, the number of episodes you do, and how long you podcast for. That's where you're going to see your virality over time. I know so many bands who were a 10-year overnight sensation. 10 years playing in some of the grossest bars for the most drunk people who cared very little, getting their gear stolen out of their cars, getting stuck in the snow, just going from place to place to place and playing for nobody, maybe the bartender, and that's it. And they do that for 10, 15 years before they become overnight successes. It's a long road. And as podcasters, we can't just skip the line. And we can't focus on people who are bigger and better than us. Because over time, that's going to wear on you when you don't get to see the results that they get. So please stop. Please stop comparing yourself to a top podcast. And focus on comparing your podcast to your last episode and how you can make it better and how you can connect with more people and build your audience one listener at a time. That's how it happens. And if you need help, I'm right here with you. Reach out anytime. It's a long way to the top if you really want to rock and roll. Hey, thanks for being here. Thank you for listening to the end of the podcast. You're here with me. I'm so grateful. I want to put something in front of you. For the person that's listened this far, you're my new best friend. So what I'm trying to do every month is I have a goal, and you can help me with this goal. Very simple. What I'm trying to do is have 5 conversations this month with listeners of the How to Podcast series. You don't have to have a podcast to respond. This can be the first time ever that we're going to have a conversation, but I'm looking to talk to 5 people. Now, you're still here, so you're one of the people that I would love to talk to next. So on my howtopodcast.ca website is a calendar. And I'd love to have you respond on howtopodcast.ca. Just click the calendar link, set up time in my calendar, and in the comments section for the meeting, just put something like listener. That's it. If you have a show, put it in the comments too so I can go listen. But if you don't, I just want to talk to 5 listeners every month from now to the end of the month. So if you're listening to me right now, you're the person I want to talk to. And through howtopodcast.ca, you and I can get together, chat about the show, chat about your journey as a podcaster. Where are you at? What do you need this show to become for you? What's missing? Your feedback. I just want to meet you. And as podcasters, I would encourage you to do something similar to this in your podcast so that you can meet and interact with your audience. So, howtopodcast.ca, I'm looking to talk to 5 people every month, and I would love for you to be one of them. Reach out. It's free. I'm not selling you anything. I just want to talk to you at howtopodcast.ca. Let's get in the calendar and chat. Thanks for listening. Hey, it's Dave. I'm still here. You're still here? Good. Okay. Well, I promised you to do an extra little Q&A at the end of the episode. Again, you know this. Most people are gone already, so it's just you and me. So my question that's come in to me from a listener that's been part of the How to Podcast family is around the idea of, should I compare my podcast stats to somebody else's podcast stats? Is this a healthy thing to do or not? Well, the answer simply is I wouldn't recommend it, and I also wouldn't recommend looking at your stats when you first start your show. I know you're curious. I know you want to know. Did someone listen to the episode that went live 10 seconds ago? I've looked. It's a trap. It's something that people can obsess over. People can worry over. It can be stressful and cause you anxiety because you want your podcast to do well. I want your podcast to do well. But when we get caught up in the trap of watching our podcast grow, it can lead to some pretty negative feelings. So my recommendation is just to leave the stats alone. Focus on creating content. Focus on getting good at podcasting before you ever get caught up in the world of stats. Stats are great. They do show you where people are listening. They do show you what device they're listening on. They do show you how many people listen to your episode. These are all good things. Stats are not a bad thing. But my concern is when it becomes your obsession. So I've heard people talk about and use this illustration before in podcasting, and I love it. I think it's really good. If you go out in the backyard and plant some seeds in the garden, they don't grow like immediately. It takes time. And if you stand there and stare at them, your neighbors are going to think you're strange. They're going to maybe wonder, like, are you okay? As I peek over the fence and watch you stare at the ground. Podcasters who create a podcast and then stare at their stats waiting for them to grow, same thing. We're kind of worried about you. Are you okay? When you create your podcast, you're starting from zero. And you need to embrace that. And don't worry about the stats. They're going to come. You're a good person. You have a good heart. And you really want to connect with people. That takes time. So don't rush it. Focus on the creating of the content and focus on building your skills as a podcaster. It takes time to do that. Now, comparing your podcast stats to someone else, it's kind of not fair. It's kind of an apple and orange thing where you don't have what the other person has. You don't have the experience they have, the connections they have, the education that they have. You don't have the influence they have. You don't have the life that they've had. So it's not fair to compare your stats to theirs. It's not fair to mock them if their stats are lower than yours. None of this is fair. You take care of you. You do you, boo. I guess that's how they say it. Focus on you. Focus on your show. Focus on becoming a better podcaster. And all good things will come to you when you make your priority growing your show, being a better podcaster, learning the craft of podcasting. Put the stats away. Put them away. You don't need them right now. They're great to have. I enjoy stats. But if I could start a new podcast today, I wouldn't even look at my stats when I start. And I would focus on building out great content that is worth sharing. That's more important than who's listening right now. So it might seem counterproductive for me to tell you to ignore your stats when all you see in Facebook groups is everyone talking about their numbers, just keep in mind that some people are lying. Some people lie. I know. Isn't that interesting? Some people lie. And some people lie and then become podcast gurus. I'll just leave that there. Focus on building your craft, and all good things will come your way. So you can compare yourself to other people, but it doesn't usually end up well for you or for them. Focus on comparing yourself to yourself, and good things are coming to you. So thanks for the question. I'll see you next time. Take care. Keep podcasting. You got this. Cheers.